thing.
Okay. Shirley Murray. I'm principal at Pequay Elementary School in the Penn Manor School District. I started off my career as an emotional support teacher in the IU13 for 5 years. Then I went to the School District of Lancaster as a special consultant for 2 years. Then I went to Mannheim Central High School as an assistant principal for 1 year, and then ended up in Penn Manor for the last 7 as principal, as elementary school principal. I started off my experience in Penn Manor at Leedsward Elementary School as principal of K-6, one of the smaller schools in the district, elementary schools in the district, and about 3 years ago shifted to Pequay because we had a shifting of some administrators. And the leadership team thought I was a better fit for Pequay because Pequay hosts the Southern and special ed classrooms. So we host the full-time, part-time learning support classrooms for the district. And the students in those classes have varying disabilities. You know, we have a kindergarten pretty much diagnostic full day program in the one classroom that's K to 1. And then a class is 2, 3, 4, and another class is 4, 5, 6, depending on the children and who we should age up and who we should not. So yeah, it pretty much explains that in a nutshell.
All right.
My undergrad program, being a special education teacher, that's where I really got my first, what it really was. Obviously, through experiences, probably, a lot of high schools have senior experiences. Ours were called Senior Project. And I had chosen to volunteer at, my project was done at one of our local elementary schools in the West Shore School District. Prior to that, I also did experience volunteering at what's called Camp Kirchenwald, which is a life skills camp over the summer for a week long where you live and reside with the students in cabins, and did that experience as well. But with IEPs, it was really that exposure in a classroom where I first got to see. Now, even then, though, you get such limited exposure because of the confidentiality. So in college, just some experience writing stuff, but not near enough experience. We didn't have an IEP class. So my real experiences were in student teaching, really getting to see, and me having to embed that differentiated instruction within my lesson plans and whatnot. And then obviously my very first classroom. I definitely think they're a huge benefit for the students because it's meeting students where they're at. It doesn't mean, though, that the detriment, I think, is sometimes the way people interpret the IEPs, is that instead of them being something that is going to help those students meet the same expectations that we have for other students, it's not about lowering our expectations. It's just ensuring that those students have every advantage of getting there with that same expectation. For example, if your child's diabetic, they can still participate and do all the same activities that everyone else can do, but they might need insulin or something to help them along the way. It's the same way with a child with an IEP. A child with a disability, or even if it's other health impairment is the purpose of their IEP, there's something there that they need some additional supports or something more to help them get to the same place that we expect. They might get there at a different pace, at a different rate, but they're still going to get there. That their child's not. So sometimes you have a parent's direction going in one way of where they expect their child to be, and their expectations could be at a different rate faster than the school district's. But we obviously need to tailor that IEP to meet the needs of the child. So it's just a lot of dialoguing about that, a lot of work samples, a lot of data collection. Data collection is really big and something I require a lot, even before a child even gets to the process of possibly even having an IEP. I ask my teachers to do a lot of work prior to that. A specific situation, I wouldn't say necessarily it was so much what was in the IEP. I think it was, again, it had to do with people's interpretation of the IEP. For example, when I first came to Pequay Elementary School, we had a young man that had transitioned into us. Because of us having those full-time, part-time learning support classes, we get students from throughout the district that are transported down to us. He was extremely violent. And when I'm saying extremely violent, pretty much when I transitioned to Pequay, my method of dealing with it was we're clearing a classroom completely, no furniture, nothing on the walls, pulling out any wires, phones, all that kind of stuff. And pretty much, you know what, sometimes you have to stand in there and you just have to deflect. Don't restrain, even though that is written into the IEP, CPI methods if necessary, which obviously CPI, you still don't want to put your hands on a child. But, you know, and then it's helping teachers understand, because teachers see you in that classroom, and I wouldn't ask one of my teachers to do anything I wasn't willing to do. So I was in there, and the child was charging at me, hitting, pulling hair, you know, and I'm deflecting to try not to have to restrain him. Because in my opinion, when you put your hands on a child, they're going to escalate even more. And granted, sometimes there's a reason and a rhyming reason to do it, but then it's the teachers are concerned regarding people's safety. So teachers begin to feel that child doesn't belong in that environment. Well, I arrived to Peckway. I transitioned between December and January. Come February 19th, after that date, the boy never had another single violent episode. And I'm not saying that's attributed to me, that's attributed to the team and everything that the team did to help everybody else interpret that IEP. So I don't necessarily think it's where the IEP was wrong. I think too often it's people's interpretation and what they're making of it. And then it's just understanding, you know. I think colleges and universities are doing a better job of preparing teachers, whether they be special education teachers or gen ed teachers. But years ago, gen ed teachers didn't really have any experience with special education in their classroom, let alone in their building. So it's just really helping people understand that and how they receive it. Because children pick up on that. If people, every time the child walks by them, kind of cringes or slides over because they're afraid, that's creating an issue too. So. Oh God, that's an issue for education, period. It really is. I think one of the important things that I have my special education teachers do is a lot of open and honest communication. Also making sure you dot all your I's and cross all your T's. Having your organization is key for a special education. It's key for any teacher, but especially for a special education teacher. Keeping a spreadsheet. You know, I require my teachers to maintain, my special education teachers, to maintain a spreadsheet of when the re-eval was done, when it's due, the IEP, you know, all the signatures, all the pages. Keep all that on the spreadsheet so they know if they're coming up on the compliance window. The other thing is, too often teachers see, I have one right now, you know, the MDE occurred January whatever, well, it would have been before January 7th, because coming up, February 7th is that due date. And this is a new teacher, he's a long-term sub. And she had the IEP meeting scheduled for this Friday. And I'm like, oh, no. And she's trying to change it now because of a therapist or outside support. And my thing is, we can't. This is our deadline. I try to tell my teachers, if you know you have 60 days, you need to schedule that meeting at least 2 weeks prior to that deadline, because you might have it scheduled and it might work for your schedule, but guess what? There's sick kids. You might get sick, a parent might get sick. So it's really about, you gotta be extremely organized with your calendar, with knowing your deadlines, communication. You know, the paperwork process is going to become much more greater than what you could ever possibly imagine if you have to go through a due process because you didn't keep all the necessary data and all the records that you should. So even the communication with the gen ed teachers, I have so I have my 3 full-time, part-time learning support classes, but I also have my 1 itinerant that services, well, this year I have 2 because of our renovation spread out. So I've got 5 of the special ed teachers right now. They need to be getting feedback from the gen ed teachers every Friday. And that is even just knowing what upcoming test students have, you know. So even keeping a calendar of this grade level is 6th grade is having their content assessment on Thursday. That teacher needs to know so they can communicate in advance with that gen ed teacher when they can prepare those students or better ready them for the assessment. Again, I think I partially answered that in the last question. It's staying in communication, keeping a organized calendar with each other, so you know when those assessments. The more supportive you are of that gen ed teacher, the better your relationship is going to be with them. But at the same time, there's a thin line between being supportive and enabling them, because you're going to encounter those gen ed teachers that aren't purposefully doing it. It's because their lack of knowledge necessarily in your area of expertise. So instead of they're about to give an assessment and they need to differentiate that assessment, you shouldn't do that for them. You shouldn't be modifying that assessment for them. You should be sitting down with them and showing them and demonstrating them how. So let's say you have multiple choice answers and you have matching or something like that. You're going to limit it. Maybe you're going to, instead of having 10 and 10, where it's 10 matching and 10 matching here, you're going to put maybe 5 here and 5 answers here and 5 here, 5 here. You know, but don't just take the test and do it for them. Sit down with them and give them some of those strategies. The more you build that kind of collaboration and that they see that you're an alliance, the more they're going to be willing to work with you. Yes, and that's not always easy. Again, a lot of times the biggest thing is hearing out their concerns, you know, and trying to imagine what it's like to be that parent, or even trying to imagine what it's like in the day of the life for that child. The more compassion that you can possibly have in managing and realizing that even if a parent is upset, or you know, you don't know what happened that morning in their household that maybe set things off, or just, you know, how that parent's feeling because they're learning for the first time that their child can't do something that the other kids can. That compassion, that listening, being a listener is the greatest thing you can do for a parent, is really listen. But then also take that listening, make sure that you understood it, so restate and make sure, you know, just so I make sure I heard you correctly, you know, and then looking at what you can do to meet in the middle. You're not always going to satisfy a parent, you're not. But 9 out of 10 times, if that parent though still trusts you and they know that you are doing it for the right reasons and you can explain, validate, and again, it comes back to data, demonstrate the data as to why you're making the decision that you are, you're gonna be fine. And the parent's going to still be okay because they trust you, because you built that rapport. Now, if you don't, you're gonna end up due process or a much more difficult situation than what you want to be in. And don't get me wrong though, you're still going to have, there's still those cases from time to time where you're doing everything you possibly can and attorneys are involved and the parent's still going to want nothing to do with you.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of one of my biggest fears, is like,
yeah. I will tell you right now, we have one of those currently right now, and I can tell you my last interaction with the parent, the month beforehand, we had at a meeting with it, there were many different parties sitting around the table, including children and youth. That should give you an idea of what kind of situation it is. And attorneys. And the meeting ended fine, it was shaking hands, everything was good. And then a month later, we walk into a conference and the parent comes in, slams her seat down, and just says, okay, let's get this over with, you guys disgust me. And we were kind of like, I'm so sorry to hear that. Let's go on with the meeting. Like, it was just, sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, it's inevitable, I guess.
It is, you know, and again, we don't know what they're dealing with. So you can't dwell on it, you can't personalize it. That's the biggest thing, you can't personalize this. You need to remember, for us, this is our job, you know, and it's your passion, of course, you know, and you love kids and all that. But you get to walk away at the end of the day, and you get to go home, and you get to live your life. For these parents, it is personal, it is their life. They're walking out of that meeting, but they're still going home with the same thing. So. That's a good question. I don't know that there's anything that necessarily frustrates me about the process. I think the most difficulty I have is too often I don't feel that teachers understand appropriate data collection, that process, or that too often teachers assume that some of the progress monitoring that they're doing is going to align with the gen ed curriculum. So what happens then is they're doing Ames web probes, or you know, all these different probes, and then they're like, oh, but they're reporting to the parent that, let's say you're talking about a 4th grade child, they're reading 4th grade Ames web probes on this level. So you're reporting to the parent that the child's working on grade level, but you're giving him an IEP with goals for that grade level. It doesn't really correlate with our curriculum. So you're giving the parent a false sense of where that student is, where their current progress is. So parents tend to think then that their child can then go out to gen ed. Which I'm a firm believer in inclusion. We have a great inclusion model here in Peckway. But the problem there and still lies is then they're quick to want to put the child out and the child just sinks. So I believe in having every possible assistant there to transition and help that transition. It's a lot easier to give a little at a time than it is to give and take away. So that's probably the greatest thing, is just that recognition of what truly correlates within the curriculum, especially with the change to Common Core now, and how rigorous that curriculum is. It's very different. I don't, and I've had the conversation with our special ed directors that I don't feel like Ames Web and some of the things that we're using, they're great progress monitoring tools, but they don't correlate with our curriculum. So that needs to be explained and clarified to parents so they truly understand.